Now, is it me or is Jenny from Forrest Gump the absolute worst? Now, I recently made a video about why Rose from Titanic sucks, but the redeeming thing about Rose is, as far as the movie shows, she only sucked for about 3 days. Jenny, on the other hand, was terrible for decades. So let's get into it. So the movie starts off with Forrest Gump sitting on a bench waiting for the bus. And while he's sitting on the bench, he begins to narrate his entire life story. So a lady sits next to him on the bench and she's reading her magazine, minding her own business, when Forrest is like, "I've won lots of shows. Mama said they're gonna take me anywhere." Right, he begins talking about random things, and the lady sitting next to him is looking like, why is he telling me all of this? But regardless of how uninterested she looks, Forrest begins telling her his life story. So as Forrest narrates his story, the next time we see him is as a kid. He's sitting on an examination table in a doctor's office, and the doctor has just finished putting leg braces on his legs. So in that scene, we find out that Forrest has a crooked spine, and as a result, his ability to walk has been affected, and that's why the braces were put in place.
But his back's as crooked as a politician.
So one key thing the doctor says on this scene is, his legs are strong. The strongest legs I've ever seen. So right from the get-go, we learn that Forrest is extremely different from every other kid in the neighborhood. Now the thing is, his mother knows that he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but despite this obvious mental disability, she tries to enroll him in Greenbow County Central School, hoping that he'll get the best education there. So Forrest and his mother show up for an interview with the principal. In the interview, the principal basically says, "Yo, your kid is dumb as hell. There's no way he's going to make it into the school.
Forrest is right here."
And that's when his mom is like, "Is there anything we can do about this? Because I really want him to get into this school." So the principal goes, "Well, maybe there's something you can do for me." Right? So in the next scene, Forrest is sitting outside of the house while his mother is inside with the principal. And he's essentially serving hot dogs to his mother, if that makes sense. So that's how Forrest gets accepted into the school. Okay, so it's the first day of school. Forrest is at the school bus stop. The bus arrives. He gets on the bus and he immediately gets the loser treatment from all the kids on the bus, right? He gets on the bus. He then takes one glance at these two kids that are sitting right next to each other. And because these two kids are sitting right next to each other, that section is occupied. But they still stop whatever they're doing to say, "Let's say it's taken," right?
It's taken.
So Forrest keeps walking down the bus. Nobody wants to sit next to him except for this one girl sitting by herself. And that's the time we finally get to meet Jenny. So Jenny and Forrest introduce themselves to each other. They then get to talking, and Jenny, being the wonderful, loving girl that she is, says this in mid-conversation. "Are you stupid or something?"
Are you stupid or something?
To which Forrest goes, "Well, my mama say, blah, 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 blah," right? And this scene is very revealing because it tells us how exactly Jenny feels about Forrest. She thinks he's an idiot. So despite thinking he's a total dumbass, they end up becoming really good friends. They start doing a lot of things together. And as a result, Forrest essentially falls in love with Jenny. Big mistake, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so one day Jenny and Forrest are walking home from school together, and out of nowhere these 3 bullies come out of the woodwork and try to attack Forrest. They end up throwing rocks at him. Jenny then says, "Run, Forrest, run, run."
Run, Forrest! Run away! Hurry!
So Forrest then begins to run with his leg braces on. They come off as he's running, and he essentially gains superhuman speed and outruns the bullies while they're on their bikes. Okay. So at this point in the movie, Forrest begins running everywhere. Every time you see him, he's in some sort of running position. However, one day he decides to run over to Jenny's place. And that's because Jenny missed out on school that day. So he gets there, he sees Jenny and he goes, "So, why weren't you at school today?" And in that scene, we can tell that Jenny's kind of taken aback. And thanks to the voiceover, we learn exactly why she feels that way.
He was a very loving man.
It turns out her father was kind of a weirdo, one that would abuse his own kids. Now this scene is extremely important because it explains Jenny's personality later on. Okay, so eventually someone calls the cops on Jenny's father. Jenny gets taken away, and because Jenny's mother passed away when she was 5, she now has to live with her grandmother. But luckily her grandmother's place was very close to Forrest's, so they ended up spending more time together, and sometimes she'd even sleep over at his place.
Jenny'd sneak out and come on over to my house.
Okay, so sometime after this, we get to see Jenny and Forrest as adults. In fact, they're in college at this point. And this is where things begin to get a little bit more interesting. Forrest gets inducted into the school football team. And Jenny, on the other hand, well, she starts to enjoy college life a little bit too much. So one day, Forrest goes over to visit Jenny, and looks like Jenny's not there because he's sitting outside of the building in the rain just waiting for her. When all of a sudden a car pulls up, it stops in front of the building, and then it looks like two people are making out in the front seat. So Forrest is looking like, is that Jenny? He then hears Jenny say something like, "Oh, that hurts," from the car. And he then rushes to try and save Jenny, who's just having the time of her life at this point. He gets to the car, opens the door, and then he begins to assault Jenny's boyfriend. So Jenny then hops out the car and goes, "Forrest, what are you doing?" But because Jenny's boyfriend just got attacked by Forrest, instead of blaming Forrest for the attack, he blames Jenny and then drives off. So Jenny's like, "I didn't need your help, Forrest. Why did you do that?" Forrest goes, "I brought you some chocolate." He then apologizes, and Jenny then brings him into his dorm room, and that's when things get weird. While they're in the dorm room, Jenny strips down to her underwear, and Forrest is just looking like, "Oh, mama." So Jenny's like, "Have you ever been with a girl before?" He says no.
Have you ever been with a girl, Forrest?
And then out of sympathy, Jenny gives him a work job that requires hands to do. You get what I'm saying. And Forrest is just sitting there like, oh. Right, because he just experienced something he has never experienced before, and it came from Jenny. However, at this point, you can tell that Jenny was not interested in Forrest and was simply doing what she did out of sympathy. So after this, Forrest's football team gets to meet the president. Soon after this, Kennedy gets assassinated. And after he graduates from college, he gets inducted into the army.
How many gives a husky shit who you are, pussball?
Okay, so Forrest gets on the bus that takes them to the army training camp. While on the bus, he meets a man named Bubba, an African-American man, and from the get-go, they begin to form a very close bond. In fact, Forrest begins to spend a lot of time with Bubba, and every time he would talk to Bubba, he'd be like, "Hey, how you doing?" And Bubba would be like, "I'm doing good. I'm just thinking about shrimp, lemon shrimp, white shrimp, coconut shrimp, just all type of shrimp."
I know everything there is to know about the shrimping business.
And eventually Bubba ends up telling Forrest, "Look, I really want to start a shrimp business after we're done here, and I want you to be my partner." And naturally Forrest agrees to it. Okay, so Forrest is still in the army. It's nighttime and he's about to go to bed. Then one of his friends hands him a magazine that looks like Playboy. And guess who he sees in the magazine? Jenny, aka Dolores. So Forrest is looking at this magazine thinking, what is Jenny doing in this type of magazine? So sometime during or after training, Forrest gets leave from the army and then he decides to visit Jenny. Now the thing is, at this time the US was heavily involved in the Vietnam War, so as a result Forrest and his team finds out that they have to go to Vietnam. So Forrest shows up at her workplace, which turns out to be a strip club, and I think at this point he doesn't know what kind of club this is because when he sees Jenny he goes, "Aw, she made it. This was always her dream."
Her dream had come true.
She sleeps in the sand.
She was a folk singer.
Right, Jenny is essentially naked on stage playing her guitar, when all of a sudden a man in the front row begins to heckle her. Then Forrest, who is always her knight in shining armor, rushes to protect Jenny, and once again Jenny is not too happy about the fact that Forrest came to protect her. Instead, she gets upset, she walks off stage, and then they have an argument. And I hope you're seeing the pattern now, because to me, it looks like Forrest will always be there to try and save Jenny, while on the other hand, Jenny doesn't want to be saved at all. So they have their argument on a bridge. Jenny then half jokes that she wants to jump off of it.
You think I could fly off this bridge?
Like that's a good joke to make. And then some random man just pulls up in a car and goes to Jenny like, "Hey, do you want to come with me?" And Jenny's like, "Sure." But before Jenny jumps in the car, Forrest tells her that, "Look, I'm going to Vietnam. It's going to be dangerous, and I hope you take care of yourself." Jenny then tells Forrest that if he sees any danger in Vietnam, he needs to run.
If you're ever in trouble, don't try to be brave. You just run, okay? Just run away.
And then she just hops in some random man's car and disappears. This is after Forrest came all this way just to see her. Okay, so cool. After this, Forrest gets to Vietnam, and while he's there, he cannot stop thinking about Jenny, right? He's thinking about her all day, all night. And while he's doing that, it appears that Jenny has joined some hippie club, and she was not thinking about Forrest as much as he was thinking about her. Now, she did write to him from time to time, but she was writing to him as more of a friend, whereas he saw her as something more. Okay, so Forrest is in the Vietnam War. While in the jungle, his platoon gets hit. Forrest then saves a bunch of them, while a lot of them end up passing away, including his best friend Bubba.
I want to go home.
Luckily, the only thing that happens to Forrest is he gets shot in the buttocks, while his lieutenant Dan ends up losing both legs. Okay, so after being in the hospital for some time, he gets sent home, and because he performed so well in the war, he gets a Medal of Honor and essentially becomes a war hero. He then ends up attempting to give a speech at the nation's capital in front of thousands of people, and then as he's giving his speech, guess who pops up out of the blue from the audience? Jenny. She's like, Forrest, Forrest. And then Forrest is like, Jenny, is that Jenny? They then run to each other in the rectangular pool in the base of Capitol Hill, and they end up embracing, right? So at this point, Forrest is thinking, I'm finally back with my long-lost love. I can finally be with her. But nope, ain't gonna happen, because Jenny alongside her new boyfriend are heavily involved in protests against the Vietnam War. The very same war that Forrest was fighting in, the one he became a hero in. Right, so when he meets Jenny's boyfriend Wesley and Jenny get into an argument. Wesley then strikes Jenny across the face. And once again, guess who jumps to the rescue? Forrest. And he ends up jumping Wesley right there and then. Now, despite being struck by Wesley a second ago, Jenny's like, Wesley, are you okay? Are you okay?
Stop it!
And then Wesley goes, why did I even bring you here? And then he storms off the scene like a baby. So after this, Forrest and Jenny get to talking. Forrest then tells Jenny about what he's gone through so far, and Jenny does the same. And from the sound of things, Jenny was living that hippie life, just migrating from place to place, doing some substances here and there. And this scene kind of implies that Jenny had been involved with multiple guys.
She told me about all the traveling she'd done.
So at this point, Forrest is just so happy to be with Jenny once again. After fighting a war, he's finally with the love of his life. But like 20 seconds later, Jenny's like, I gotta go now. And then she hops on a bus with Wesley and then disappears once again. Right? I'm sure you see the pattern now. Forrest and Jenny reunite, then things are looking good for a while. And then Jenny's like, see ya. And then she disappears, leaving Forrest heartbroken once again. Right? And the funny thing is, before she leaves this time with Wesley, Forrest goes, I want you to have this. And then he hands her his Medal of Honor. So Jenny's like, why are you doing this? Why are you giving this to me? To which Forrest goes, because you're my girl. Because you're my girl. And instead of saying, no, I'm not interested in you at all, Jenny goes, I'll always be your girl.
I'll always be your girl.
And then she disappears with another man. And it's almost as if she's leading Forrest on. So, after this, Forrest levels up, he becomes a ping pong champion. And while Forrest is leveling up and becoming a better person, we see scenes of Jenny with black eyes. She's living in very poor conditions, and once again, she appears to be on some substances, right? And the crazy thing is, while this is happening, while Jenny's having the time of her life, Forrest cannot stop thinking about Jenny, even when he gets approached by other women. And shortly after this, his team gets discharged from the army. So he goes home and finds out his mom has turned his brand into a business.
Everybody wants you to use their ping pong stuff.
Also, he starts pursuing Bubba's dream to be a shrimp boat captain, right? He buys a boat, names the boat Jenny of all things. And eventually he gets 2 boats, 3, 4, 12, naming them all Jenny, and then he becomes the person that he was always supposed to be. So one day Forrest gets a message from home, one that says, your mom's sick and you better come home now. So he goes back home to his sick mom, who at this point is dying from cancer. They have a bit of a heart-to-heart, they bond, and eventually his mom passes away while Jenny is nowhere to be found. His so-called best friend and love of his life is nowhere to be found when he needs her the most, right? So as time passes, Forrest gets richer and richer, he makes more investments, but despite all the good things that are happening in his life, guess what? He can't stop thinking about Jenny. And then one day, she arrives. When Forrest sees Jenny for the first time, they embrace. They then end up having long lovey-dovey conversations. And once again, it looks like Jenny is back in his life. Forrest then helps her heal from trauma. And then because he spent so much time with her, and because he's so happy to have Jenny back in his life, he's like, "Jenny, will you marry me?" And then Jenny goes, "Ugh, Forrest, you don't want to marry me."
You don't want to marry me.
He's like, "Is it because I'm stupid?" She's like, "No, it's not that. I just can't be with you." And then that very same night, she hops in bed with him and they end up doing the deed, right? This is right after refusing his marriage request. Okay, so things are finally looking up for your boy. Forrest is back in business and he finally bagged the love of his life. And then he wakes up and guess what? Jenny is nowhere to be found. And that's because she left the premises when he was asleep. And once again, Jenny is gone. Now at this point, any normal person would be thinking, okay, maybe this is not gonna work. But because Forrest is who he is, he stays fully in love with Jenny. Except now he's heartbroken. And in order to deal with the heartbreak, he ends up running across the country for 3 years. And in doing so, he becomes more popular than ever. He starts to get covered by the news. Then he develops a bunch of loyal followers who begin running along with him, right?
Here's somebody who's got it all figured out. Here's somebody who has the answer.
And this lasted for about 3 years until one day he was like, I'm done with everything. And then he goes back home. Okay, so cool. So Forrest is back home, he's living his life once again, but then out of nowhere he gets a mail from Houdini once again. And I'm talking about Jenny. And remember how Forrest was on the bench waiting for the bus at the start of the movie? Well, it turns out he was waiting for a bus to see Jenny. And while he's sitting there telling his story to a lady, she's like, "You do know that address is right up the road, right?" So he's like, "Word?" And then he ends up running to Jenny's place. And this is where things get even more crazy. He gets there, Jenny's looking healthier than ever. She then tells him she's been keeping tabs on him. And then out of nowhere, somebody knocks on the door, drops off a kid, and Jenny's like, "Well, there's your kid." Right? And when you look at the kid looks about 3 to 5 years old. That means Jenny has been keeping this kid a secret from Forrest this entire time. And I won't lie, the first time she revealed this information to Forrest, I was like, are you sure this is your kid? Because we all know how Jenny gets down. But Forrest goes, "Oh, that's my son, alright. I seen the way he tilts his head." And then he begins to raise that boy. Alright, so the next time we see Forrest and Jenny, they're outside having a conversation. Jenny then says, "Look, I have a disease and things are not looking very good. Oh, and will you marry me?" Right?
Forrest, I'm sick.
The very same woman that refused Forrest time and time again now wants to get married. And it almost makes you go, like, why do you want to get married now? Is it because now you have a kid? Is it because that now you're older now and you've got all the fun out of your system? How does this work? But despite all the red flags, Forrest then marries Jenny. They then spend a little bit of time together before she passes away. And keep in mind, she's passing away from the disease that she had. Right? So she dies. She then leaves Forrest with a child that may or may not be his. And also because she died of HIV or AIDS, she might have passed that on to Forrest before she died. It's never explicitly said in the film, but there's a strong chance that when Jenny passed away, she left Forrest with HIV AIDS and a kid that may or may not be his. Jenny. She was the worst. That's all I can say. So yeah, that's the video. Let me know down below if you want me to talk about somebody else, maybe from another movie, maybe from this one. And yeah, later.